Food is paid for, she said. You don't leave hungry. That one sentence spoken by a tired, broke single mother in a dying Arizona diner cost her a week's wages she couldn't afford to lose. And 3 days later, it brought 680 motorcycles to her front door. If you believe one act of kindness can change everything, stay with me until the very end of this story because Claire Morgan's story will shake something loose inside your chest. Subscribe to this channel, hit that bell, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning it all began, Claire Morgan was already running on fumes. She had been awake since 4:30, not because her alarm went off, but because the silence of her house had a way of waking her up. Now, that particular kind of silence that comes when you've already done the math in your head and the numbers still don't work. She'd been lying on her back in the dark, staring at a water stain on her ceiling that had been spreading slowly for 2 months, thinking about the $847 she owed her landlord by Friday and the $312 electric bill that was already 11 days past due. She didn't have either of those amounts. She pulled on her uniform, pale blue shirt, dark pants, white apron, and checked on her son before she left. Danny was 16 and already big for his age, sprawled across his mattress with one arm hanging off the side. He looked peaceful in sleep the way teenagers do, and Claire stood in his doorway for a moment longer than she needed to, just watching him breathe. There was something about watching your kid sleep when you were worried about keeping a roof over his head that made the fear feel sharper and more tender at the same time. She closed his door quietly and walked out into the early Arizona morning. The diner was called Sal's, though Sal himself had been dead for 11 years. His daughter Linda had inherited it and kept the name out of what she said was sentiment, though everyone who worked there suspected it was because she was too cheap to repaint the sign. It sat out on Route 93, a long flat strip of road that connected nothing particularly important to nothing particularly interesting, and it got its business mostly from truckers, highway travelers, and the occasional group of motorcyclists passing through on their way to or from somewhere that sounded more exciting than rural Arizona. Claire had worked there for 6 years. She'd started after the divorce when Danny was 10, and her ex-husband Marcus had cleaned out the joint account before the ink on the paperwork was dry. She'd needed something fast, something that paid in cash tips, something she could work without a degree or a resume that didn't look like a gap-filled disaster. Sal's had given her that. It wasn't a career. It wasn't a plan. It was survival dressed up in a blue shirt. The morning shift started at 5:30. By 6, she had 3 tables going and a pot of coffee that kept getting emptier faster than she could refill it. Gary, her manager, a broad-shouldered man in his mid-50s, with a red face and a habit of standing too close, was already watching from behind the counter. With that look, he had the one that said he was calculating something about her that she wasn't going to like. "You're 40 seconds late," he said, not looking up from his clipboard. "My car stalled at the light on Meridian," Claire said, tying her apron strings behind her back without breaking stride. "I don't manage your car. I manage your clock in." She didn't answer him. She'd learned years ago that answering Gary was like feeding a stray. With bad habits, the more you engaged, the more he came back. By 8 o'clock, the breakfast rush had thinned out to the usual mid-morning quiet, a trucker nursing his 3rd cup of decaf at the counter, 2 older women sharing a slice of pie by the window, a young couple with a baby who had been coloring on their paper placemats for 40 minutes. Claire was refilling ketchup bottles and running the numbers in her head again, the way she always did when things slowed down enough to let the worry back in. Friday was in 3 days. She had $218 in her checking account. The front door opened with its familiar aluminum and glass rattle, and a rush of warm outside air moved through the diner. She looked up. 3 men walked in. They were bikers. That was immediately obvious, not just from the leather vests, but from the way they carried themselves, the way exhaustion sat on them differently than it did on most people. These were men who had been riding for a long time without stopping, and it showed in the creases around their eyes, the stiffness in the way they moved. The particular blankness of people who have been running on grief and motion and nothing else. The tallest one, maybe late 40s, thick, gray-shot beard, a cluster of patches on his vest that Claire didn't know the meaning of, led them to the corner booth without asking the way people do when they've learned not to wait for permission. The other 2 followed. One was younger, maybe 30, with red-rimmed eyes that hadn't finished crying yet. The third was quiet and compact, the kind of man who took up physical space efficiently and emotional space not at all. Claire brought 3 menus and 3 water glasses. Take your time, she said. The tall one, she would learn later that his name was Ray, looked up at her when she said that. Just briefly, like it surprised him. They ordered simply. Ray got the eggs and toast and coffee. The young one, she'd hear the others call him Cody got a burger and fries, though he'd barely touched it by the time they were done. The quiet third man ordered coffee and oatmeal and sat with both hands flat on the table like he was trying to keep himself from floating away. Claire brought everything out and let them be. She refilled their coffees twice without being asked. She didn't hover. She didn't make small talk. She had a sense the way you do after enough years of serving people who are carrying something heavy, that these men didn't need brightness right now. They needed to be left alone in a warm place with hot food. She was at the counter writing up a table's check when she heard Ray's voice low and steady. "Miss," she walked over. He had the check in his hand. He was looking at it the way people look at documents they know are going to require a hard conversation, not reading it exactly. More like bracing. "I need to be straight with you," he said. Claire waited. "We can't pay this." His voice didn't waver when he said it. He wasn't embarrassed exactly, or rather he was choosing not to perform embarrassment because he was too tired for performance right now. "We rode from New Mexico. We just buried our brother yesterday. Danny, not Danny Mac. We just buried Mac." He stopped for a second. "We've been riding for 2 days, and we spent the last of what we had on gas in Flagstaff." Cody was staring at the table. The quiet third man hadn't moved. Claire looked at the check in Ray's hand. $46.32. She thought about Friday. She thought about the water stain on her ceiling. She thought about Danny asleep with his arm hanging off the mattress. And then she thought about something her mother had told her once, a long time ago, when Claire was still young enough to believe that principle was more durable than money. Her mother had said, "Claire, there are going to be moments in your life when the right thing and the easy thing are not anywhere near each other. And in those moments, you're going to find out who you actually are." She reached out and took the check from Ray's hand, and she tore it in half. "Food is paid for," she said. "You don't leave hungry." Ray stared at her. For a moment, just a moment, something in his face broke open, not dramatically, not theatrically. Just a small fracture, the way stone cracks when the temperature shifts suddenly. His jaw tightened and he looked away toward the window, and he blinked once deliberately. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know," Claire said. "Go ahead and finish your coffee." She turned around and went back to the counter before she could let herself think too hard about what she'd just done. What she had just done was absorb $46.32 out of her own paycheck. Gary didn't miss things like that. He counted everything, every comped meal, every replaced dish, every voided check. He had a ledger he kept by hand, which should have been endearing in a retro sort of way, but wasn't because the ledger was a weapon and Gary used it like one. She didn't know it yet, but Gary had seen. He'd been watching from the kitchen pass through with the particular attention of a man who has been waiting for a reason. The 3 bikers left 20 minutes later. Ray stopped at the door and turned back to look at Claire, who was already at another table. He held her gaze for a moment and gave a single nod, the kind of nod that's more than acknowledgement, the kind that carries weight, the kind that means something in a language she didn't know she'd just been introduced to. Then they were gone. Claire went back to refilling ketchup bottles. And Gary came out from behind the counter. "My office," he said. Now, she'd been in Gary's office before. It smelled like burnt coffee and old paper, and there was a motivational poster on the wall behind his desk that said, "Excellence is not an option," which was the kind of thing that only sounds like wisdom until you think about it for more than 4 seconds. Gary sat down heavily and put the ledger on the desk between them like a judge setting down a gavel. "Table 9, he said. "They couldn't pay," Claire said. "They just lost someone. They didn't have anything left." "That's not your call to make." They were grieving Gary. This isn't a charity. His voice went flat and hard in a way she recognized the voice he used when he wanted to make sure you understood the architecture of the situation, meaning that he was above you and the gap was non-negotiable. "Every comp comes out of operating. You know that. You've known that since day one. I'll cover it. You already are. 4632 comes out of Friday's check." He opened the ledger. "That plus the $19 variance from last Tuesday's drawer, which I've been letting sit. That drawer wasn't my fault. Sarah miscounted. Sarah's not here having this conversation." He looked up. You've been with us 6 years, Claire. I've given you a lot of rope. She felt something cold move through her chest. Are you firing me? I'm documenting. He held up a pen. Right now, this is documentation. What it becomes depends on you. She walked out of his office with her face still the way she'd learned to hold it when she needed to get through something without showing anyone how much it had cost her. She went to the bathroom and ran cold water over her wrists, a trick her mother had taught her for when the panic started to climb, and stood there for a full minute staring at her reflection. You're fine, she told herself. This is manageable. You have handled worse than this. That was true. She had handled worse. She'd handled Marcus walking out with the savings account and her dignity in 2 years of her life that she'd never recover. She'd handled the diagnosis that had come 3 years ago. Not life-threatening, the doctor had been careful to see, but chronic and expensive and the kind of thing that creates a financial leak that never fully seals. She'd handled Danny's school calling to report that he'd been showing up without lunch 3 days in a row, and the particular shame of realizing that her son had been saying he wasn't hungry when he actually just didn't want her to worry. She had handled all of it. She dried her hands and went back to work. What she didn't know was that Ray, sitting on his motorcycle in the diner parking lot, had made a phone call. He hadn't meant to necessarily. He wasn't the type of man who made dramatic gestures or orchestrated things for effect. But he'd sat there on the bike with the engine idling, and he'd thought about Mac, about the service yesterday, about the box they'd put in the ground, about the ride back through the desert with nothing but wind and grief, and he'd thought about that woman inside who had taken a check out of his hand and ripped it in two without asking for anything in return. And something about the combination of those two things, the death and the kindness, had made him pick up the phone. He called his chapter president. You're not going to believe what just happened, Ray said. He told the story plainly. He wasn't a man who embellished. He gave the facts, the diner, the bill, the woman, what she said, what she did, what it had cost her to do it. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then his chapter president said, What's the name of the place? Sal's, out on 93. Another pause, shorter this time. And her name? Claire, Ray said. I didn't get her last name, but she works the morning shift. Blonde, maybe mid-40s. She's the one. The chapter president said, Ride safe, brother. And the call ended. Inside, Sal's Claire was clearing table 9, the booth where the bikers had sat. She stacked the plates and wiped down the surface with a damp cloth. Cody's burger was only half eaten. She looked at it for a moment, and then she thought about the $19 coming out of her Friday check on top of the $46, and she did the new math in her head. $153. That was what she would have after deductions. That was what she had to work with between now and the next pay period. The water stain on her ceiling did not get smaller when you did the math. She carried the plates to the back and kept moving because stopping was not something she could afford to do right now. Gary watched her from behind the counter. He was the kind of man who measured people by how quickly they bent, and he had noticed that Claire Morgan bent slowly, which he had always interpreted as stubbornness, but which was actually something closer to structure. She was built the way certain old things are built, not to be decorative, but to hold weight. He didn't understand that yet. He didn't understand it at all. By mid-afternoon, the lunch rush had come and gone. Claire had made $41 in tips. 3 tables had overtipped, which occasionally happened when something in her face, or her speed, or her plain practiced efficiency moved people toward generosity. She folded the bills into her apron pocket and felt the arithmetic of her life rearranging itself again. $194. Still not enough. She was refilling the salt shakers at the counter when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out just enough to see the screen. It was a text from Danny. Mom, Mrs. Patterson called, said my registration fee for the tech program is due by the end of the month. She stared at the text for a moment. The tech program was Danny's. He had found it himself, applied himself, gotten accepted himself. It was a 2-year certification course at the community college in Prescott, HVB2 Systems, the kind of practical trade education that actually led to jobs, the kind of jobs that came with benefits and stability and the particular dignity of being able to fix something that was broken. He'd been accepted in January. The registration fee was $350, and they had been slowly putting money aside for it, $20 here, $30 there, the way you save for something when saving is a luxury you can't quite afford. She texted back, I know, baby. We're working on it. Don't stress. Then she put her phone in her pocket and stared at the salt shaker in her hand and counted to 5 in her head, the way she did when the world was pressing in from too many directions at once. "You crying over there?" Gary's voice from the other end of the counter. Not kind, not mean, just indifferent, which was somehow worse. "Allergies," Claire said and kept filling the salt shakers. She worked until 7. She drove home in the dark on a car that needed new brake pads in an alignment she'd been putting off for 4 months. She picked up a bag of rice and a can of beans from the K Station convenience store because she hadn't had time to get to the grocery store, and because rice and beans were filling and cheap, and Danny didn't complain about them, even when she could see that he wanted to. She got home and cooked, and they ate together at the kitchen table. Danny talked about something his friend Marcus. Different Marcus, he'd started specifying after the divorce, just so she didn't flinch, had said at school something about a car engine they'd been taking apart in the auto shop class. He was animated about it, hands moving, face alive, the way teenagers get when they're actually interested in something versus performing interest for an adult. She watched him and felt that particular double pain of loving someone so much it makes the fear sharper. "Mom," Danny said, reading her face the way he'd gotten good at. "You okay?" "I'm good, baby," she said. "Just tired. Tell me more about the engine." And so he did. And for 20 minutes over rice and beans at a kitchen table in a house that needed a new water heater and roof repairs and a dozen other things she couldn't afford, she forgot about Friday and about the $46 and about Gary's ledger. She just listened to her son talk about engines. She didn't know, couldn't have known that, at that same moment in a dozen different places across 4 different states, her name was being spoken by people she had never met. She didn't know that Ray's phone call had moved through a network like current through wire. She didn't know that a story, her story, the story of $46.32 in a torn check and 5 words, was traveling faster than she could have imagined through a world that operated by codes she'd never studied, honoring principles she'd never been formally taught, building towards something that had no name yet. She didn't know any of that. She just washed the dishes and checked the lock on the front door and went to bed. The water stain on her ceiling looked exactly the same in the dark as it did in the daylight. She stared at it for a while, then finally she closed her eyes. She woke up Thursday morning already behind them. That was the thing about poverty that people who had never lived inside it didn't understand. It wasn't just a financial condition. It was a cognitive one. It occupied mental space the way a chronic pain occupies the body, always present, always humming, beneath everything else, reshaping how you move through the world. Claire had been waking up behind for so long that she'd almost stopped noticing it. Almost. She checked her phone before she got out of bed. Force of habit, there was a text from her landlord, Mr. Okafor, a patient man who had given her more grace than she deserved and who was now gently but clearly running out of it. "Claire, I want to work with you, but I need something by Friday, even partial. Please call me." She set the phone face down on the mattress and sat up. She had $194. She needed $847. The gap between those two numbers was not a gap anymore. It was a canyon, and the bottom of it was eviction. And eviction meant Danny changing schools, Danny losing the connections he had finally started building after 2 years of being the new kid, Danny watching his mother fail in the most visible and humiliating way a parent can fail, by not being able to keep a roof over his head. She got dressed. She checked on Danny. She drove to Sal's. Gary was already there when she arrived, which was unusual. He typically came in at 8 after the worst of the breakfast crush had settled. But this morning he was standing behind the counter with his arms crossed when she pushed through the door at 5:29, and he had the ledger open on the counter in front of him. "We need to talk about yesterday," he said. Claire tied her apron strings and reached for the coffee pot. "I'm on shift, Gary. Tables aren't going anywhere." He put one finger on the open ledger page. 4632. I've documented it. It'll come out of Friday. "You told me that yesterday." "I'm telling you again today because I want it understood." He leaned forward slightly. "This isn't a soup kitchen, Claire. People who can't pay go to places that handle that. That's not us. You do not have the authority to make that call on behalf of this establishment." "Are we clear?" She poured coffee. "We're clear. Because the next time something like this happens, it's not documentation. It's termination. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" She turned and looked at him directly. Her voice was flat and even, and she had spent 6 years learning how to make it that way in front of him. I understand perfectly, she said. He looked at her for a moment, searching for something to use, a tremble, a crack, an invitation to push harder. He didn't find one. So he closed the ledger and walked back toward his office, and Claire carried the coffee pot to the counter and told herself Friday. Get to Friday. That's all. The morning moved fast. A trucker named Dennis, who came through twice a week, told her she looked tired, and she said she was fine, and he left her $4 on a $12 check, which was actually generous for Dennis. A family of 5 parents, 3 kids under 10, the kind of controlled chaos that made Claire think of when Danny was small and everything was hard in completely different ways, took up 2 booths for an hour and a half and left her $11. A young woman sat alone by the window and ordered only coffee and kept looking at her phone, and eventually Claire brought her a plate of toast she hadn't ordered and said, "On the house. You look like you need it," and didn't think anything of it until she realized 20 minutes later that she'd just done it again, given something away she didn't technically have, and felt the flutter of anxiety move through her chest like a small bird trapped in a closed room. She couldn't help it. That was the truest thing about Claire Morgan. She couldn't help it. By 9:30, the diner had settled into its mid-morning quiet, and Linda, the owner, Sal's daughter, a thin woman in her 60s, who wore her hair in a tight gray bun and spoke mostly in the form of complaints about overhead costs, had arrived and planted herself on the stool at the far end of the counter, where she conducted what she called oversight, and everyone else called watching us work while she drinks our good coffee. Linda had heard about the check. Of course she had. Gary had called her. Gary always called Linda when he had something to report, because Gary's position in the hierarchy required Linda's validation to mean anything, and so he fed her information the way a lesser animal brings offerings to a larger one. "Come here a minute," Linda said without looking up from her phone. Claire came to the counter. "Gary tells me you comped a table yesterday." 3 men who'd just buried a friend and had nothing left, Claire said. "Yes." Linda set her phone down and looked at Claire with the expression of a woman who had run a business for 11 years on margins, thin enough to cut yourself on, and had developed in that time a complete intolerance for sentiment. "Do you know how many people come through here with a hard luck story?" Linda said. "These men weren't performing. They were grieving. Everyone who doesn't want to pay has a reason. Their reason was that they watched their brother get put in the ground the day before," Claire said, and she kept her voice level but didn't soften it. "I made a judgment call. I stand by it." Linda picked her phone back up. "The amount will be deducted, and if it happens again, Gary has my full authority to take whatever steps he deems necessary." She paused. "I'm not running a charity, Claire." "So I've been told," Claire said, twice now actually, before 9 in the morning. Linda looked up sharply at that, not angry exactly, but recalibrating. She wasn't used to Claire talking back. In 6 years, Claire had been so careful, so contained, so professionally quiet. Something had shifted. "Watch your tone," Linda said. Claire picked up a cloth and started wiping down the counter. "I've got tables." She walked away. Her hands were shaking slightly, but only she knew that. In the kitchen, Marcus, not her ex, the line cook, 23 years old, earbuds, perpetually in one ear, said quietly as she's passed, "I heard all of that. For what it's worth, you did the right thing yesterday." "You were here yesterday." "I'm always here," he said, flipping something on the grill. "Nobody ever notices the cook." She almost smiled. Almost. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. "Don't thank me. It won't pay your rent." He looked at her sideways. "But you still did the right thing." She carried plates out to table 4 and told herself he was right. About both things. By noon, something else had started. She noticed it first as a kind of low, persistent awareness. The feeling you get when you're being talked about in a room that shifts in the social atmosphere. 2 of the other waitresses, Deb and Keely, had been quiet around her since she'd come in. Not unfriendly quiet, more like the quiet of people who know something and are deciding how to handle knowing it. During the lunch rush, while they were both in the back refilling waters, Deb said it straight out. "Gary's been talking to some of the regulars about you." Claire stopped. "Talking about what?" "About yesterday, about the bikers." Deb lowered her voice. "He's making it sound like you've been giving food away behind their backs for a while, building a pattern. He told Dennis you had a history of unsanctioned comping." Claire felt her stomach tighten. "That's not true." I know it's not true. Deb looked at her. But Dennis told the Hendersons, and the Hendersons are friends with Linda's sister. So now there's a version of this story going around that's not your version. Of course there is, Claire said. I just wanted you to know. Thank you, Deb. Don't thank me. She picked up her water pitcher. And maybe watch your back. Claire stood still in the back for a moment alone, running the new information through her mind, the way you run water through a pipe to check for leaks. Gary wasn't just documenting. Gary was building something, which meant Gary had a goal beyond documentation. She thought he's going to fire me. He's been wanting to for a long time, and now he has enough of a structure around it that he can make it look like cause. And then she thought, I need this job. I cannot lose this job right now. Not Friday, not this week. She went back out and worked the lunch rush with everything she had, fast, efficient, precise, her smile automatic, and her hands never still. She upsold the daily special 4 times. She turned tables faster than she had in months. She was for 3 hours the best version of herself in this job, and she did it out of pure, clean desperation. At 2:15, she made a mistake. A table of 4 had ordered an appetizer that the kitchen had run out of. Marcus had substituted something of equal value without checking with Claire first. When the check came, Claire hadn't caught the substitution, and the table was charged for the original item. The difference was $11. The table pointed it out, calmly, not rudely. Claire apologized immediately and went to the register to correct it. Gary intercepted her before she got there. What happened? He said. She explained. Clearly, calmly, factually. He looked at the ticket, then he looked at her, and then slowly, deliberately in front of the 2 customers closest to the register, he said loud enough to carry, "This is the second financial error you've made in 2 days, Claire. I need you to understand that this goes into the record." The 2 nearby customers looked up. Claire felt heat climb her face. Not embarrassment, something closer to fury, which she pressed down immediately because this was not the place, and Gary knew that and was using it. "It was a kitchen substitution," she said quietly. "Ask Marcus." "Marcus isn't at the register. You are." "Gary, I'll handle the correction." He took the ticket from her hand. "Go back to your section." She stood there for 1 full second, long enough to feel the indignity of it settle into her bones, and then she turned around and went back to her section. She would not cry in this diner. She had made herself that promise years ago, and she had never broken it, and she was not going to break it today. At 3 o'clock, she took her 15-minute break in the parking lot, sitting on the hood of her car, eating a granola bar she'd brought from home because she couldn't afford to eat at the diner. And Gary had a policy about staff meal discounts that was technically generous and practically meaningless. Her phone buzzed. It was from a number she didn't recognize. Arizona area code, but not a contact. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. "Is this Claire from Sal's on 93? A man's voice, deep, careful. "Who's asking?" "My name is Joe. I'm a friend of Ray's." A pause. "Ray came in this morning with 2 others. You helped them yesterday." Claire said nothing for a moment. "I just wanted to say thank you," the man said, "on behalf of a lot of people who heard what you did. We take care of our own, and you treated ours like they were worth something when they had nothing to offer you. That matters." "They were people who needed a meal," Claire said. "That's all." "That's not all," he said. "Not to us." She didn't know what to say to that. She sat on the hood of her car in the parking lot of the diner that was currently trying to build a case against her, and held the phone against her ear and felt something strange move through her. Not hope exactly. Something quieter than hope. Something more like the sensation of not being entirely invisible. "How did you get this number?" she asked. "Ray got it from the diner number. Called and asked for the waitress who worked this morning. The woman who answered said your name." He paused. "I hope that's okay." "It's okay," Claire said. "Are you all right?" he asked. And the directness of it, the plainness of the question, caught her off guard. "I'm managing," she said. "Ray said your manager wasn't happy." "My manager is never happy. That's his baseline." She exhaled. "I'm fine, really. I'm glad they made it out okay. They're resting now. They'll ride home tomorrow." Another pause. "I just wanted you to know that what you did, it wasn't taken lightly. Not by any of us." She sat with that for a moment. "Thank you for calling," she said. "That was kind." "Yes, ma'am," he said. "You take care of yourself." The call ended. She sat on the hood of her car for another few minutes eating her granola bar, watching the traffic move on Route 93. Trucks, passenger cars, the occasional motorcycle, though not one she recognized. She thought about Joe's voice, the weight it carried, the deliberateness of every word. The way he'd asked, "Are you all right?" like he actually wanted to know the answer. She thought about Ray's face when she'd torn that check, that small fracture she'd seen that crack in the stone. Then she finished her granola bar and went back inside. Gary was waiting. "I need you to stay until close tonight," he said. Keely called out. Closing was 11. She'd been on since 5:30. She was bone-tired already. "Fine," she said. "Clock in for the extension at 3:15. And Claire," he stopped her with his voice before she'd taken 2 steps. "I'm going to need you to recount the drawer from this morning's shift before you go back on." She turned around. "Why?" "Because I said so." He met her eyes without flinching. "Because we have a pattern of discrepancies and I'm tracking them. That's my job." She held his gaze for a long moment. Then she walked to the register and started counting. The drawer was exactly right. Of course it was. It was always exactly right. She announced the total without looking at him. "Write it down," he said. She wrote it down. She handed him the slip of paper. He filed it in the ledger without comment, and she went back to work. The afternoon stretched long and thin. The dinner rush came and went. By 8 o'clock, her feet were past the point of hurting and had moved into that separate category of physical sensation that isn't quite pain anymore, just presence, a constant awareness of the floor of gravity of the years accumulated in the soles of her shoes. She kept moving because stopping was how you noticed it. At 8:45, a group of 4 regulars she recognized, men who came in most Friday evenings, retirees who ordered the same things every time and tipped moderately, and asked her about Danny because they'd been coming in long enough to remember when he was small. One of them, a man named Robert, waited until she'd brought their coffee and then said quietly, "We heard what Gary's been saying about you." Claire set the coffee pot down. "Robert, we also heard what you did for those bikers." He looked at her steadily. He was maybe 70 with the direct gaze of a man who'd stopped wasting time on indirection. "Wanted you to know there are people in this room on your side." "I appreciate that," she said. "I genuinely do." "Gary's not a good man," Robert said. "Never was. He's my manager. He's a bully with a clipboard." Robert picked up his coffee. "Just don't let him make you forget what you know about yourself." She carried the coffee pot back to the warmer station and stood there for a moment with her back to the dining room, pressing that thought flat inside her chest so it didn't open into something she couldn't control right now. Don't let him make you forget what you know about yourself. She didn't forget. That was the thing. Even in the worst of it, the deductions, the ledger, the public corrections, the conversations designed to diminish her, she had not forgotten. She had torn that check because it was right. She would tear it again. That knowledge sat in her like ballast, keeping her level when everything else pitched. She closed the diner at 11:15. She counted the drawer perfect as always and wrote the total in the log and left it on Gary's desk and locked the front door behind her. She drove home in the dark. Danny had left the porch light on for all her. She stood outside for a moment before going in the warm Arizona night, with the sound of insects and the distant hum of highway traffic and the porch light burning yellow above the door. She thought about the number in her account, the Friday deadline, the deductions, the gap that was a canyon. She thought about Robert saying, "Don't let him make you forget." She thought about Joe's voice on the phone, "What you did, it wasn't taken lightly." And then she went inside and she checked that the door was locked, and she looked in on Danny, who was asleep with his arm off the mattress again, and she stood in his doorway longer than she needed to. She didn't know that at that exact moment, in a parking lot 3 states away, 43 men were gathered around a fire and her name was being spoken with a reverence she would never have believed she'd earned. She didn't know that the phone call from Joe had not been the end of something. It had been the beginning. She went to bed and stared at the water stain on her ceiling, and somewhere out in the dark on roads she'd never traveled, engines were idling. She woke up Friday knowing it was the day the numbers had to answer for themselves. Mr. Okafor had texted again at 7 in the morning. Not pushy, not threatening. Just the quiet persistence of a man who needed what was owed to him and had run out of ways to ask for it gently. Claire read the message sitting on the edge of her bed, still in the clothes she'd fallen asleep in because she'd been too tired to change, and she felt the specific weight of that Friday morning settle into her shoulders like something physical. She texted back, "I'll call you this afternoon. I have a plan." She didn't have a plan. She had $194 in a shift that started in 40 minutes. Danny was already up, which was unusual for a Friday. He was in the kitchen when she came out, standing at the counter eating cereal, and he looked at her the way he'd been looking at her lately, with that careful, measured attention that teenagers develop when they've figured out that the adults in their life are carrying more than they're saying. "Mom," he said, "I called the tech program office yesterday." She went for the coffee. "About the registration fee. About deferring. They said I can defer enrollment by 1 semester without losing my spot." She turned around. He was looking at her directly without flinching, and she recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had made a decision that cost them something and had decided it was the right thing anyway. He looked in that moment startlingly like her. "Danny, you don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to." He ate a spoonful of cereal. "I want to. It's 1 semester, Mom. It's not the end of the world. And that takes the pressure off the fee right now when you do not need that pressure right now." She stood holding her coffee mug and felt something move through her chest that wasn't grief exactly, but lived right next to it. "You shouldn't have to be thinking about this," she said. "Well, I am thinking about it." He shrugged the practiced teenage shrug that was supposed to make big things look small. "Because I live here and I'm not 10 anymore." He paused. "Is it going to be okay with the rent?" She took a breath. "It's going to be fine." He looked at her for a long moment, deciding whether to believe her. "Okay," he said, and went back to his cereal. She drank her coffee, standing up, and got dressed, and drove to Sal's, and did not let herself think about how much she hated lying to her son, because if she started thinking about that, she would have to think about everything else too, and she didn't have room for everything else right now. Gary was at the register when she walked in. He did not say good morning. She did not say good morning. This had become their rhythm, stripped down to its essential structure. He watched she worked, and somewhere in between, they maintained the fiction that this was a functional, professional relationship. The morning moved fast, faster than usual actually, because Deb called in sick at 7, and suddenly Claire was covering the entire floor alone through the breakfast rush, which would have been difficult on a good day, and was close to punishing on a day when she'd slept maybe 4 hours and eaten half a granola bar for breakfast. She moved like a machine table to table coffee, to coffee order to order, and her tips were good because she was good even when she was running on empty, and she had learned a long time ago that being good at this job was one of the few things in her life that hadn't been taken from her yet. At 8:47, something happened that she would not understand the significance of until much later. A man she didn't recognize came into the diner and sat at the counter. He was maybe 60 solid through the shoulders, wearing a plain jacket, nothing that marked him. Nothing that identified him as belonging to anything. He ordered coffee and eggs and ate quietly. He left a $20 bill on an $8 check and walked out without saying anything. She thought nothing of it. She pocketed the $12 tip with silent gratitude and kept moving. At 9:15, a woman came in alone, middle-aged, sensible shoes, ordered just coffee, and sat reading something on her phone for 40 minutes. When she left, she stopped at the register and said to Claire, "You're the one who helped those bikers Wednesday, aren't you?" Claire paused. "Word travels. My nephew rides with a chapter out of Flagstaff," the woman said. She wasn't unfriendly. She wasn't making anything of it or performing anything. She just said it the way you state a fact. "He texted me last night, said what you did was a real thing." She nodded once, picked up her purse, and walked out. Claire stood at the register and looked at the door for a moment after it closed. The story had a shape she couldn't see yet. By 10 o'clock, she could feel it, something moving in the atmosphere around her, the way you feel weather change before you can name what's coming. 2 more people mentioned it. A trucker at the counter said, "Heard you took care of some riders the other day," in the tone of a man paying respect. A young couple came in, specifically she could tell because they looked at her when they walked in looking for something checking, and the woman said, "We just wanted to eat here after what we heard." And then, like it was nothing, like it was the most natural thing in the world, they sat down and ordered pancakes. She refilled their coffee and didn't ask questions. Inside her chest, something was shifting, but she couldn't name it yet either. Gary came out of his office at 10:30 with the expression of a man who had been building toward a conversation and had decided this was the moment. My office, he said. She followed him in. He sat behind the desk with the ledger open. He had a printout next to it, a column of numbers she recognized as her transaction history printed from the register system. I've been reviewing your record, he said. I assumed. 6 incidents of register variance in the past 8 months. He ran his finger down the column. 3 comped items outside of approved policy. The incident Wednesday. The substitution error yesterday. He looked up. This is a pattern, Claire. 2 of those variances were during the shifts I shared with other staff. The comps were within $20, each one approved verbally by you in the moment, which I can document because I kept records. She said it flat clear without hesitation because she had been keeping records too. She hadn't told him that until this moment. And the substitution was Marcus, which he'll confirm. Gary's expression shifted slightly. Just slightly. The recalibration of a man who had expected less resistance. Even so, he started. Gary. She leaned forward just enough. I know what you're doing. I've known what you're doing since Wednesday. You want cause. You're building toward a termination with cause, so you don't have to pay out anything. She kept her voice even. She was terrified, but she was also done performing submission for this man. I've worked here for 6 years without a written disciplinary action. Not one, though. If you fire me, I want everything in writing dated with signatures. Every line item, every justification, and I want it reviewed by someone above you, which means Linda in person, before anything is finalized. Silence. Gary looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't respect either. It was the expression of a man recalculating. You can go back to your section, he said. She stood up. Thank you, Gary. She walked out. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against her thighs for a moment in the hallway before she trusted herself to hold a coffee pot. Marcus appeared from the kitchen doorway, catching her eye. He raised his eyebrows. Well, she gave him a small nod. He went back into the kitchen, but she saw the corner of his mouth move. The lunch rush came. She worked it. She made $63 in tips by 1:30, which was the best lunch she'd had in months. And she didn't fully understand why, until Deb, who had apparently recovered from her illness fast enough to come in for the afternoon, said quietly while they were both at the server station, "People are coming in because of you." What do you mean? I mean, 3 of the tables I seated in the last hour specifically asked if you were working today. Deb looked at her with an expression that was somewhere between impressed and bewildered. Somebody posted something online about what you did Wednesday, some biker forum or Facebook group or something, and it got shared. She paused. A lot. Claire stared at her. How much is a lot? Marcus showed me on his phone, thousands of shares, maybe more by now. Deb shook her head slowly. Claire, people are coming to this diner because of you, because of what you did. She didn't know how to hold that information. She took it and she set it somewhere in the back of her mind, and she went back to work because the floor needed covering and people needed coffee, and she was not the type of person who could process large emotional information while standing still. But her mind was moving underneath all of it. Thousands of shares. She thought about Joe's phone call. She thought about the woman whose nephew wrote out of Flagstaff. She thought about the man who'd left $12 on an $8 check without saying a word. She thought about Ray's face when she'd torn that check. That fracture in the stone. At 2:45, her phone rang. Unknown number, different area code this time, Nevada. She answered it in the parking lot on her break. Claire Morgan. A woman's voice, older businesslike, but warm underneath it. Yes. My name is Patricia. I'm the treasurer of a nonprofit foundation connected to several writing chapters across the Southwest. A pause. I've been asked to reach out to you by a number of members who heard your story. Claire said nothing, just listened. We have a hardship fund, Patricia continued. It was set up for situations where a person has done something significant for our community and found themselves in difficulty. I know that might sound strange to you. It probably does. But I want you to know it's legitimate and it's been operating for 9 years. And the people who asked me to contact you are asking because they mean it. Another pause. Are you in a position to receive support right now? Claire looked at the highway. A truck moved past, slow and heavy. I'm not looking for charity, she said. It came out automatically, the reflexive pride of someone who had been managing alone for so long that accepting help felt more dangerous than not having it. I know that, Patricia said. That's actually why I'm calling. People who aren't looking for it are usually the ones who need it most and the ones who do the most with it. Her voice was steady, unhurried. Can I ask, are you all right, honestly? The question again. Are you all right? The same question Joe had asked, the directness of it. I have a son, Claire said, and then because she didn't know why she was saying this to a stranger, she kept going anyway. He deferred his enrollment this morning, so I wouldn't have to worry about the registration fee. He's 16. He shouldn't be making decisions like that. Silence on the line. No, Patricia said quietly. He shouldn't. So no, Claire said. I'm not all right, but I'm still standing. That's all we needed to know, Patricia said. I'm going to send you some paperwork today by email. It's straightforward, just your address and a signed authorization. Nothing complicated. Whatever we're able to provide, it will come directly to you. No strings, no conditions, no obligation of any kind. Why? Claire said. The word came out small and real. Why would people I've never met? Because Ray told us what you said. Patricia's voice shifted into something quieter. He said you didn't just give them food. He said you looked at 3 broken men and you made them feel like they were worth something. And that matters to people who have spent a long time being looked at like they're not worth anything at all. Claire stood in the parking lot and pressed the phone against her ear and did not cry. She did not cry because she was still on shift and because crying in the parking lot of Sal's was not something she was going to do. Not today, not ever, but it was close. Thank you, Patricia, she said when she could. Check your email, Patricia said. And Claire, you hold your head up in there. Whatever that manager is doing to you, you let it go in one ear and out the other. You know who you are. The call ended. She stood in the Arizona heat for another minute, just breathing. Then she went back inside. She sent Patricia her email address from the server station between tables, typed fast on her phone with one thumb. The authorization paperwork came through 11 minutes later. She signed it in a bathroom stall on her break at 4 o'clock, standing up using the wall as a flat surface, and sent it back. She didn't know what was coming. She had no idea of the scale of it. She thought maybe there would be enough to cover part of the rent. Maybe to buy Danny another month. Maybe if she was lucky to keep the lights on through the weekend. She thought small because she had trained herself to think small, because thinking big was how you broke your own heart. She went back out and worked the dinner setup. At 5:15, Gary came out of his office with a piece of paper in his hand. He walked to where Claire was setting up a table for 4 and held the paper out to her. Formal warning, he said, then sign at the bottom. She took the paper and read it. It cited the Wednesday comp, the substitution error, and 2 of the historical variances, the ones she'd noted, were shared shifts, which the paper did not mention. The language was constructed carefully, just carefully enough to look like documentation and just vaguely enough to be used for whatever purpose he needed next. She read it twice, then she looked up at him. I'm not signing this, she said. Gary blinked. Excuse me? It contains factual inaccuracies. It omits context that I've already provided you verbally and in writing. And it's dated today, which means it was prepared after our conversation this morning, which means it's a response to me asserting my rights, not a genuine record of performance issues. She folded the paper once cleanly and held it back out to him. I'd like a copy for my own records, but I'm not signing it as written. Gary did not take the paper. He stared at her. Around them, the diner had gone very quiet in the way that spaces go quiet when people are pretending not to listen while listening to every word. You are making a significant mistake, he said. Maybe, Claire said, but it's mine to make. She set the paper on the table between them and went to get the salt and pepper shakers. Gary stood there for a moment. Then he picked up the paper and went back to his office and closed the door. Deb appeared at her elbow a moment later. What just happened? I don't know yet, Claire said, but something had happened. She felt it. The air in the room felt different, not hostile but charged. Robert's table, 3 booths over, was watching her with something on their faces that she didn't let herself name yet. Marcus appeared briefly in the kitchen window, caught her eye, and gave a single slow nod. The dinner rush began at 6, and it was the busiest Friday she'd worked in months. Table after table. People who had never been to Sal's before sitting down and ordering like they'd been coming for years. Tips that didn't match the math of what people had ordered. 20% on a $15 check, 25 on a $20, a $50 bill, left under a coffee cup by a man who was out the door before she reached the table. By 8 o'clock, she had made more in tips in one shift than she had in the previous 2 weeks combined. She stood at the server station counting it out with Deb watching, and neither of them said anything for a moment. People know, Deb said finally. Yeah, Claire said. They came for you. She looked at the money in her hand, at the worn edges of the bills, the way money looks when it's been carried for a while, when it's real and not abstract, when it's been someone else's before it was yours. I didn't ask for this, she said. No, Deb agreed. That's probably exactly why it happened. At 9:30, her phone buzzed on the server station. She glanced at it between tables. It was an email notification. From Patricia's Foundation. Subject line authorization confirmed initial transfer. She clicked on it, read it standing up between table 7 and the coffee warmer. The amount in the body of the email made her hands stop moving. She read it again, and then a third time because the first 2 times she had assumed she was misreading it. She wasn't misreading it. She stood very still, holding her phone in the middle of a busy Friday dinner shift, and felt the floor do something strange beneath her feet. Not literally, but in the way the ground shifts when the fundamental facts of your situation have changed faster than your mind can update itself. She put the phone in her apron pocket. She picked up the coffee pot. She refilled table 7's cups. And she did not say a word to anyone about what she had just read because she still didn't fully believe it. And because even if she did believe it, there was something happening out there in the dark that was bigger than an email and bigger than transfer amount and bigger than anything she had vocabulary for yet. She could feel it. Out on the highways under the wild black Arizona sky, something was moving toward her. She didn't know what it was, but it was coming. She didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in bed and her body was horizontal and her eyes were closed for stretches of time, but sleep didn't come, not the real kind because her mind wouldn't stop running. She kept reading the email in her head, the number, the amount Patricia's Foundation had confirmed. She kept waiting for it to feel real, and it kept not feeling real the way certain things refuse to settle into the ordinary texture of your life because they don't belong to the life you've been living. She got up at 2 in the morning and sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and her phone, and she read the email 4 more times. She checked her bank account. The transfer hadn't cleared yet. Patricia had said it would post by Monday, but the confirmation was there, time-stamped official real. She set the phone face down on the table and put both hands flat on the wood surface, the way the quiet third biker had done in the diner, and she breathed. She thought about Danny deferring his enrollment. She was going to tell him tomorrow that he didn't have to. She was going to tell him he could call the program back and defer that the registration fee was handled, that he was going in on time. She had been rehearsing how to say it without crying because she needed to say it without crying so that he didn't feel the full weight of how close it had been. She went back to bed at 3. She was still awake at 4:30 when the first sound reached her. It was so faint at first that she thought she imagined it. A vibration more than a sound, a low continuous frequency that she felt in the walls before she heard it with her ears. She lay still and listened. It grew. Slowly, steadily, the way a storm builds from weather you can feel before you can see it grew. The vibration became a rumble. The rumble became something she recognized and didn't recognize at the same time because she knew the sound of motorcycles. She heard them on Route 93 all the time. But this wasn't the sound of motorcycles passing. This was the sound of motorcycles stopping. Many of them. Close. She sat up. Her first thought irrationally was that she had left something on in the kitchen. Her second thought more rationally was that she was still half asleep and misinterpreting something. Her third thought didn't finish forming because by then she was at her bedroom window and she was looking out, and what she saw made her breath stop in her chest like a hand had closed around it. The street in front of her house was full, not full like traffic, full like an organized presence, motorcycles lined up with a precision that was almost military, row after row, stretching in both directions farther than the yellow glow of the streetlights reached. Riders standing beside their bikes, not moving, not loud, not chaotic. Still, hundreds of people standing in the early morning dark in complete deliberate stillness. Her heart was slamming. She pulled on her jeans and a sweatshirt and shoved her feet into her shoes without untying them, and she went to Danny's room. Danny, she put her hand on his shoulder. Danny, wake up. He came up fast, the way teenagers do when they hear something serious in a parent's voice. What happened? I need you to come look at something. He followed her to the living room window. For a moment, he said nothing. He just looked. Then, Mom, who are those people? I think she stopped, started again. I think they're here because of what happened Wednesday at the diner. Danny turned and looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. It was the expression of someone whose understanding of the world has just been revised in a fundamental way, like a map that has turned out to be significantly wrong about the terrain. Because you bought those guys breakfast, he said. Because I tore up a check, she said. I didn't buy them anything. I tore up the check. He looked back at the window. Outside in the dark, not one person had moved. There are hundreds of them, he said. I know. Mom, we should call. He stopped. Should we call someone? The decision made itself before she finished thinking it through. No, she said. No, we go outside. Danny looked at her. They came here, she said. The least I can do is meet them. She unlocked the front door. The sound hit her first, not the rumble of engines because the engines were off, but the ambient sound of hundreds of people breathing and shifting in the dark, the low murmur of voices, the leather and metal and presence of a crowd that was not chaotic, that was organized and purposeful and waiting. The air smelled like engine heat and morning and something she couldn't name. She stepped onto the porch. Danny came out behind her and stood at her shoulder. He was taller than her. Now she registered that again, the way she did sometimes when had that happened. When had her son become someone who stood at her shoulder instead of beside her knee, and she was glad he was there. From the crowd, a figure separated and walked toward them. He was a big man, not threatening in his bigness, but substantial, the kind of man who fills space completely without trying to. He wore a leather vest with patches she couldn't read clearly in the low light, and he moved with the measured ease of someone who has been in charge of large things for a long time. His hair was gray at the temples, and his face was weathered in the way that desert sun weathers everything honestly and completely. He stopped at the bottom of her porch steps. Claire Morgan, he said. Yes, she said. My name is Thomas. I'm the president of the Southwest chapter. He said it simply without ceremony, the way someone states a fact that requires no performance. Ray called me Wednesday. By Thursday morning, 23 chapters had heard the story. By last night, he paused, looked around at the assembled crowd behind him. Well, it's been a while. You can see. She looked out at the street, at the rows and rows of riders still in the early morning dark. I don't understand, she said, and it came out honest, completely honest, because she genuinely didn't. I fed 3 men breakfast. That's all I did. Thomas tilted his head slightly, and something in his expression shifted, not impatience, but the look of a man who is about to explain something that matters to him. You fed 3 men who were broken, he said, who had nothing, who had just put their brother in the ground and ridden 2 days through grief, and they walked into your place with nothing to offer you, and you didn't treat them like a problem. You treated them like they were worth something. He paused. Do you know how rare that is for people like us to walk into a place and be treated like we're worth something by a stranger who has nothing to gain from it? She didn't answer because there wasn't an answer for that. We live by a code, Thomas said. Has been that way a long time. The code says you take care of your own. And it says when someone outside treats yours with genuine respect, real respect, not performance, not fear, not tolerance, you honor that. You respond to it. He looked at her steadily. You didn't just feed 3 hungry men. You honored our dead, though you didn't know it. Mac was one of ours for 31 years. And you treated the men who mourned him like human beings. Danny made a sound beside her. Not a word, just a small, involuntary sound, the kind that escapes when something hits you in a place you weren't guarding. Claire looked at the crowd again. She was trying to count and couldn't. The rows went too far back into the dark. How many people are here? She asked. It's 183 as of an hour ago, Thomas said. Some are still riding in. The number landed in her chest like a stone dropped in still water. The rings of it kept moving outward. Thomas, she said, and her voice was steady. She kept it steady. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything, he said. We came to say something. He turned slightly and looked back at the assembled crowd, and something unspoken passed between him and the rows of riders, some signal she didn't catch, and then he turned back to her. We know what's been happening at the diner, he said. We know about the deductions. We know about the manager. She felt her stomach tighten. How, Patricia, he said. She talked to you yesterday. She does her homework. Claire exhaled slowly. That's my business to handle. It was, Thomas said, and then it became ours. He held up one hand before she could respond. Not to interfere, not to make trouble, just to make sure you know you're not handling it alone anymore. From behind him, one of the riders came forward. A woman, 50s, short silver hair, carrying a thick envelope. She held it out to Claire without speaking. Claire looked at it. Go ahead, Thomas said. She took the envelope. It was heavier than it looked. She opened the flap and looked inside, and then she closed it again, because she couldn't look at what was inside standing on her porch in front of 683 people, without losing every piece of composure she had left, and she was not doing that. What is this? She said, and her voice had gone quiet. Cash contributions from riders across 7 states. Collected last night after word came through that Patricia had made contact and confirmed your situation. Thomas's voice was even. There's more coming. Some folks wired money to Patricia's fund directly. She'll tell you the total when it posts. Claire pressed the envelope against her chest. Her hands were shaking, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Danny put his hand on her shoulder. She felt that his hand warm and certain, her son anchoring her to the ground. There's something else, Thomas said. He glanced back again, and 3 men came forward from the crowd. One of them Claire recognized with a jolt that moved through her like electricity ray. He was in the middle, hands in his jacket pockets, and when he met her eyes, he gave that same nod. The weighted one, the one that meant something in the language she was only now beginning to understand. Ray, she said. Morning, he said. You did this. I made one phone call, he said. These people made the rest of their own choices. Same way you made yours Wednesday morning. She looked at him for a long moment. How's Cody? She said. Something in Ray's face moved. He's better. He's here, actually. He gestured back into the crowd. Somewhere. The third man who had come forward, not Ray, not the one beside him, but a younger rider, maybe 25, with his hands in his vest pockets and his eyes red, the way eyes are red when they have been crying recently, stepped forward and held out something to her. A folded piece of paper. What's this? She said. Scholarship, he said, and his voice was rough. For your boy. Enough to cover 3 years of technical training, not just the 1 semester. He swallowed. It's from Mac's family. His sister set it up last night when she heard the story. She said, he stopped, cleared his throat, started again. She said Mac would have wanted it. He was an HVAC man himself. Claire looked at the paper. Then she looked at Danny. Danny was staring at the young rider with an expression that was completely open, completely unguarded. Every defense a 16-year-old constructs against the world, stripped away in a single sentence. His mouth was partly open. His eyes were bright. For me, he said. If you want it, the young rider said, your mom can look it over. It's real. Patricia's foundation administered it. Danny looked at his mother. And Claire Morgan, who had promised herself she would not cry, who had made that promise 6 years ago in the bathroom at Sal's and had kept it through every humiliation and every difficult morning, and every math problem that didn't solve, Claire Morgan put her hand over her mouth and she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. She just stood on her front porch with the envelope pressed to her chest and her son's hand on her shoulder and a folded piece of paper in her other hand, and she cried. The way people cry when they have been holding something very heavy for a very long time and someone has finally helped them put it down. No one in the crowd moved. No one made a sound. 683 people stood in the early morning and let her have that moment completely without rushing it. Danny put his arm around her. Fully around her, not the sideways half hug of a teenager trying to look cool. He pulled her into him and held on. Thomas looked at them for a moment. Then he looked away, out toward the horizon, giving them the privacy of his averted gaze. When she had herself back, it took maybe 90 seconds, which felt like longer and felt like less. She straightened. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at Thomas. You said you know about the manager, she said. Her voice was clear again. Thomas looked back at her. We do. What are you planning? Nothing illegal, he said. Nothing that crosses a line. But Gary Beaumont has been docking wages from 3 employees over the past 2 years in ways that don't match the payroll records Linda files with the state. We have a friend in the labor board's office, not a member, just someone who owes a favor, who flagged it. He paused. A formal complaint was filed this morning at 6 a.m. She stared at him. How long have you known that? She said. Patricia found it in 8 hours, Thomas said. She's thorough. She stopped. That's his job. That's his livelihood. His livelihood that he built on stealing from yours. Thomas's voice didn't harden when he said it. He was stating a fact, not making a threat. He docked wages he wasn't entitled to dock. He created false documentation to support termination he wanted to pursue for personal reasons. There are 3 other employees with similar records. He looked at her. You aren't the first, Claire, and if nothing happened, you wouldn't have been the last. She absorbed that. Around them, the sky was beginning to change, the first gray-blue softening at the edges of the dark that meant dawn was coming. In the changing light, the crowd was more visible now, the faces clearer, the patches and leather and weathered expressions of hundreds of people who had ridden through the night to be here. What do you need from me right now? She said. Nothing, Thomas said. We just needed you to know you weren't alone. He paused. And there are some folks here who want to look at your roof and your car. She blinked. My car. Brake pads, he said, and an alignment. Takes about an hour. We've got 2 mechanics in the group. She looked at him, then she looked at the crowd, then she looked back at him. You know about my brake pads, she said. Patricia, he said again. Patricia knows about my brake pads. Patricia knows about everything, Thomas said, and the corner of his mouth moved. Danny made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. She looked at him sharply, and he looked away, but she caught the brightness in his face, that particular brightness of a young person who has just watched something impossible become possible and is still deciding whether to believe it. Okay, she said, because there was nothing else to say. Okay. She looked out at the crowd, at the rows of riders standing in the growing light, patient and still and present. 683 people who had driven through the night because a woman they had never met tore up a $46 check 3 days ago. She thought about her mother, about principle being more durable than money, about the right thing and the easy thing not being anywhere near each other and finding out who you actually are in the space between them. She thought she understood now what her mother had actually meant. It wasn't just about the choice. It was about what the choice cost you, and it was about what kind of world chose to notice. Thomas, she said. Yes. I'm going to make coffee. She looked at the crowd. It's going to be very bad coffee because I only have what's in my kitchen, but we brought supplies, he said. She stopped. Of course you did, she said. And for the first time in 3 days, maybe longer, maybe much longer, Claire Morgan laughed. It started small and it became real, and it came from somewhere deep, from the place where the fear had been living, and it moved through her like the first clean breath after a long time underwater, and she let it come, all of it, standing on her porch in the growing Arizona light, with her son's arm around her and 683 people who had come to tell her in the only language they knew that what she had done was not stupid and was not meaningless and had not gone unseen. Outside, the sky was turning gold at the edges, and somewhere in the crowd, someone started an engine, then another. Not to leave, just to be heard, to mark the moment. The sound built the way it had built, in the dark, one voice becoming 2, becoming 100, becoming the full living roar of something enormous and deliberate. And it rolled across the neighborhood and up into the gold-edged skate, and Claire stood in the middle of it and felt it move through her bones. She thought I tore up a check. She thought, that's all I did. And she thought my mother was right. The coffee was terrible. Claire had said it would be, and she was right, thin, slightly burnt, made in a 12-cup machine that needed descaling and had needed it for 4 months. But the riders drank it without complaint, standing in her driveway and on the street in front of her house, in the growing morning light, passing cups between them like something ceremonial. And she stood at her kitchen counter, making pot after pot of it because it was the only thing she knew how to give them, and giving was the only thing she knew how to do. Danny was outside. She could hear him through the screen door actually talking to a group of riders who had gathered near the car. His voice had that particular quality it got when he was genuinely interested in something, that forward-leaning energy she'd heard when he talked about engines at the kitchen table 3 nights ago. She didn't know what they were discussing, and she didn't need to. She could hear that he was okay. More than okay. Thomas came inside at 7:15 and sat at her kitchen table without being asked, the way people sit in a home when they've decided it's a safe place, and she put a cup of bad coffee in front of him and sat across from him. Patricia will call you Monday, he said, when everything posts, the full number. She already sent me the initial transfer, Claire said, last night at the diner. Thomas nodded. That was the foundation fund. What came in last night from the chapters, that's separate. Combined. He paused and she got the sense he was choosing his words carefully, not to diminish the impact, but to deliver it without overwhelming her. Combined, it's going to change what your next year looks like. Significantly. She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. I keep trying to find a way to say that this is too much. Is it going to fix your life? She looked at him. It's going to give me a chance to fix my own life. That's different. He considered that. Then it's not too much. She looked down at the mug. She thought about the water stain on her ceiling. She'd been staring at it for 2 months, adding it to the list of things she couldn't address, couldn't afford, couldn't fix. She thought, I can fix that now. That specific, small, dumb thing. I can just fix it. The thought was so ordinary and so enormous at the same time that it made her laugh just briefly, just to herself. What? Thomas said. I've got a water stain on my bedroom ceiling, she said. I've been looking at it every night for 2 months. I was just thinking that I can fix it now. Thomas looked at her for a moment. Give me 20 minutes, he said. She blinked. I wasn't asking. I know you weren't. He was already standing up. We've got 2 roofers in the group. They've been waiting for something to do. She opened her mouth to argue and then she closed it because she was learning slowly in real time, sitting at her own kitchen table, that there was a kind of grace required in accepting help from people who needed to give it, that refusing was its own form of selfishness, that saying yes sometimes was the braver thing. Okay, she said. He went outside. She sat at her kitchen table alone for the first time since 4:30 that morning and let the quiet settle around her. She could hear the sounds of people outside, voices, movement, the occasional burst of laughter, the distant sound of someone working on her car, and the house, which had felt so silent and so heavy for so long, felt different now. Not less hers, more alive. Her phone rang. She looked at the screen. Linda, she answered it. What is happening at your house? Linda's voice was high and tight, the voice of a woman who has just received information that she wasn't prepared for and is trying to process it through a very narrow opening. I've had 3 neighbors call me. There are motorcycles on your street, Claire. Hundreds of them. I've had people calling the diner asking what's going on. They're here because of Wednesday, Claire said, because of the bikers I helped. This is a spectacle. This reflects on the diner. This reflects on... Linda, Claire's voice was quiet, not aggressive, just final. I need to tell you something and I need you to listen. Silence on the line. I know about the wage discrepancies, Claire said. I know about what Gary has been doing to the payroll records. I know it affects me, and I know it affects Deb and Keeley, and at least 2 others. A formal complaint was filed with the labor board this morning. She paused. I didn't file it, but I'm going to cooperate with it fully. The silence on the other end was a different kind now. Heavier. Claire, I've worked for you for 6 years, Claire said. I've been good at my job for 6 years. I've done everything right and I've been treated like a liability for the last 2 of those years by a man you kept giving authority to because he told you what you wanted to hear. Her voice stayed level. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't shaking. I'm not angry at you, Linda. I'm telling you what happened. What you do with it is your business. Another silence. Then Linda said in a voice that had lost about half its volume, What are you saying exactly? I'm saying I won't be coming in for my shift on Saturday, Claire said, or any shift after that. She heard Linda exhale. You're quitting. I'm leaving, Claire said. There's a difference. Quitting sounds like I'm running from something. I'm not running. I'm done. She paused. I want my last paycheck, including all improperly docked wages going back 18 months, calculated against the actual payroll records, not Gary's ledger. Patricia Reyes at the Southwest Writers Foundation has a labor attorney on retainer who has already been briefed. If the check is correct, that's the end of it. If it's not correct, she let that sentence end itself. Silence. I'll look at the records, Linda said. Her voice had gone flat in the way voices go flat when the fight has left them. Thank you, Claire said. And she meant it not sarcastically, not triumphantly. She genuinely meant it because Linda was not entirely a villain in this story, just a woman who had looked away from things she should have looked at, which was a different category of failure. I hope the diner does better, she said. I mean that too. She ended the call. She sat at the table for a moment. The house was alive around her footsteps on the roof. Danny's voice outside, the distant sound of her car being lifted on a jack. Her whole world being quietly, methodically repaired by strangers who had driven through the night. She thought 6 years of that place. And it ends with a phone call I made from my kitchen table on a Saturday morning while 600 people stand in my driveway. She thought her mother would have found that hilarious and exactly right, and probably would have said something like, "That's how it's supposed to go. Baby, the exit matches the woman." She went outside. The street was still full. Some riders had begun to cluster in smaller groups. The collective intensity of the early morning settling into something more relaxed now that the formal part of the morning had happened. A group near the neighbor's fence were passing around a thermos. 2 men she didn't recognize had her car hood up and were working with the methodical ease of people who understood machines the way she understood a dining room completely and without having to think about it. Ray was leaning against the fence at the edge of her yard, alone for the moment. She walked over to him. "I called Linda," she said. He looked at her. "How'd it go?" "I quit." He held her gaze. "How do you feel about that?" She thought about it genuinely because it deserved a genuine answer. "Like I've been holding my breath for 6 years and I just exhaled," she said, and also terrified, both at once. "That's about right," Ray said. "What happens now?" she said. "For you, for the 3 of you. You're going home today. This afternoon, Cody needs to sleep in his own bed." He glanced toward the crowd and she followed his gaze and found Cody, the young one with the red-rimmed eyes from Wednesday, sitting on a cooler someone had brought, talking to Danny. Actually talking, both of them leaning forward in that way young men do when they've found a frequency that matches. "He likes your kid," Ray said. "Danny doesn't talk to many people," she said. "Cody doesn't either, not since Mac." Ray looked at them. Mac was like an older brother to him. They used to work on bikes together every weekend. He was quiet for a moment. Grief is a strange thing. It makes you need people you haven't met yet. She thought about that. "Ray," she said, "tell me about Mac." He looked at her a little surprised. People didn't usually ask that. They asked about the club, about the ride, about the spectacle. They didn't ask about the man in the box. "He was 62, Ray said, "retired mechanic. Terrible cook, but he made this one chili that was, I don't know, it was unreasonable how good that chili was." He paused. He laughed too loud. Always. You could hear him from 3 rooms away. He'd been riding for 40 years. He never missed a funeral. Didn't matter if someone in the community went down, Mac was at that service. Every time. He stopped. Looked at the ground. That's why it hit so hard, I think. All those services he showed up for. And his was it was small. Just us, his sister, a few neighbors. He looked up. And then 3 days later, a woman in Arizona tears up a check, and now this. He gestured at the street. He would have hated all this attention, and he would have loved every second of it. She laughed. And Ray laughed too, just briefly, and it was the realest sound she'd heard from him. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Thank you for asking," he said. At 10 o'clock, Thomas gathered everyone in the street. Not formally, no stage, no microphone, just his voice carrying in the way voices carry when people are used to listening to them. He said it simply. The morning was coming to a close. People had ridden far. Some had farther to go, and before they left, there was one more thing. He called Claire forward. She walked out to the middle of the street where Thomas was standing, and the crowd formed a loose circle around them, not closing in, just present, and she felt the weight of all those eyes on her. Not uncomfortable, but real. The realness of being seen by many people at once. Thomas held out an envelope, not like the one from last night. This one was flat, a card-sized envelope sealed. "This is from Mac's sister," he said. "She asked me to give it to you personally. She couldn't be here, she's in New Mexico still, but she wanted you to have this." Claire took it. She looked at it for a moment. Her name was written on the front in careful, slightly unsteady handwriting, the handwriting of someone older. Someone whose hands shook a little now, someone who had written this out deliberately and with effort. She opened it. Inside was a card. On the front was a simple image, nothing elaborate, just a small illustration of a road stretching into a horizon. Inside, in the same careful handwriting, My brother spent his whole life showing up for people. He believed that was the whole point. He would have loved you. He would have said you understood. Thank you for being kind to the men who carried him home. Eleanor. Claire read it twice. Then she held it against her chest the way she'd held the envelope last night, and she looked up at the sky because that was the direction you looked when you were trying not to come apart in public, and she breathed. Thomas put his hand briefly on her shoulder. That was all. That was enough. The crowd began to move. Not all at once, gradually, organically, the way a gathering disperses when it has accomplished what it came to do. Engines starting in ones and twos, riders pulling out from the curb and heading back toward Route 93 and the highways that would carry them north and east and west and back to the lives they'd left to be here. Danny stood beside her, and they watched together as the street slowly over the course of the next 40 minutes returned to itself. She counted she couldn't help it until the number stopped being countable and became just a river of people heading somewhere else. Ray was one of the last to leave. He walked to her with his helmet in his hand and stopped in front of her. "You going to be okay?" he said. "Yes," she said. And this time when she said it, it wasn't the automatic reassurance she'd been giving people for years. It was a real answer. She was going to be okay. She knew that now with a certainty that sat differently in her chest than anything had sat there in a long time. He nodded, started to turn. "Ray," she said. He stopped. "Next year," she said, "when you come back through Arizona, you and Cody and whoever else, you come here first, not the diner. Here, I'll make breakfast." He looked at her for a long moment. "You sure about that?" he said. "I make very good eggs," she said. "Unlike my coffee." He laughed. The full laugh this time, not the brief corner of the mouth version, the real one, the one that went all the way up to his eyes. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We'll take you up on that." He put his helmet on and walked to his bike and started the engine and pulled out of her driveway and onto the street. And she watched him go until the sound of his engine faded into the general hum of Route 93 in the distance. Danny was beside her. "Mom," he said. "Yeah." "I'm not deferring." She looked at him. "I'm calling the program Monday morning and undeferring," he said. "I'm going in on time in the fall." She put her arm around him all the way he'd held her this morning, and she pulled him in. "Yes, you are," she said. They stood in the quiet street for a while longer. The neighbors had mostly gone back inside the initial alarm of the morning, having settled into the anticlimactic piece of after. The two mechanics had finished with her car brake pads, replaced alignment, corrected, and they'd found two other things while they were in there and fixed those two without being asked, without a word. She tried to thank them, and they'd waved her off in the way people wave off gratitude when they're doing something because they want to, not because they need recognition for it. Her roof had been patched. The water stain would dry, and she'd paint over it, and it would be like it was never there. Her debt would clear by the end of the month once Patricia's transfers posted. Danny's scholarship was real documented and waiting for him in the fall. Her car worked. Her house worked. And in 2 weeks, when she had rested and thought and made the list of things she actually wanted from the next chapter of her life, not the survival list, not the crisis list, but the real list, the one she hadn't let herself write in years, she would make that list and she would begin. She went inside and she washed the coffee cups, all 12 of them, one by one. The cups that 683 strangers had drunk terrible coffee out of in her driveway at dawn. And she set them on the drying rack, and she stood at her kitchen sink for a moment with her hands still damp. And she thought about Eleanor's card. My brother believed that was the whole point. She thought about her mother. The right thing and the easy thing aren't anywhere near each other. And in that space, you find out who you actually are. She thought about Gary's office and the ledger and the formal warning she'd refused to sign and the 6 years of holding herself level under the weight of a man who measured people by how quickly they bent. She thought about Wednesday morning, the 3 men walking in, the check, the moment of hesitation, that one real moment where she'd felt the math of her own life pressing in from every direction, where she'd known exactly what it would cost her and had done it anyway. One choice, $46.32. And then Ray's phone call, and Joe's call, and Patricia's email, and the woman in sensible shoes whose nephew rode out of Flagstaff, and Thomas standing at the bottom of her porch steps in the dark, and Cody on a cooler talking to her son, and Eleanor in New Mexico sitting down with shaking hands to write a card to a woman she'd never met because that woman had been kind to the men who carried her brother home. 683 people who had driven through the night for a torn check. For a woman who had looked at three broken men and decided in the space of a breath that they were worth more than the math. Claire Morgan dried her hands on the dish towel. She looked at the ceiling at the patch of it above the kitchen light where a small crack had been spreading since last winter. One more thing on the list she hadn't been able to fix. She thought, I'll get to that next. And then she went outside to sit with her son in the morning, in the quiet of a street that had just held something enormous and was now simply itself again, and she let the day begin. Some acts of kindness disappear without a trace absorbed by the world, without an echo unwitnessed and unremembered gone before they can mean anything beyond the moment they lived in. And some acts of kindness fall into the world like a stone into still water, and the rings move outward and keep moving long after the stone has settled. Touching shores, the person who dropped it will never see reaching distances. They never imagined river turning to them. Finally, as a wave they don't recognize until they're already standing inside it. Claire Morgan tore up a check. That was all. That was everything. And the rings are still moving.